Hi, welcome to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some. I'm Congressman Mark Pocan. One of the areas that stood out during the Biden administration was the work on behalf of consumers. From fighting junk fees to securing fair deals for consumers, we had several agencies that prioritized the interest of American consumers. And one of those agencies that did an especially strong job of protecting consumers was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, created out of the Dodd-Frank law from years before. After too many unregulated and unwatched practices by financial institutions and quasi-financial institutions, we had a financial meltdown, and Congress rightfully created an agency to be a watchdog. And depending who's in the White House, the agency's approach to protecting consumers can widely vary. In the Biden administration, it was particularly aggressive. And that agency was particularly aggressive in large part due to its director, Rohit Chopra. Director Chopra was there during the agency's creation and had served on the Federal Trade Commission, another watchdog agency for consumers. And in 2021, President Biden named Chopra to be the director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We'll call it from now on, I think, CFPB, and the rest is history. And until February of this year, he served the American people well, fighting scams and financial ripoffs. But in February, President Trump let him go as he began dismantling this important agency, and we'll talk about that a little more down the road. Our guest for our one question today is the Senate Democratic leader in the state of Wisconsin, Dianne Hasselbein. Dianne, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dianne. So I have a question, and because you're in state government, we're going to change the one we usually do a little bit. Instead of what one federal law, how about what one state law? If you just had the kind of magic ability to change, what would that one federal law be that you would change, and why?
I would let people have the freedom to choose for the reproductive freedom. I think that's really important for us to be able to do that. But also, I'm going to cheat. I would do Medicaid expansion in the state of Wisconsin as well, because I think we've lost billions of dollars already, and I think we could be covering more people, and we want our friends and neighbors taken care of. And so that's one thing those are two things that I would do. So I cheated a little bit. I hope that's okay.
Well, that's right. The first one, you're changing a law that we're living under from 1849. Yeah.
1849.
And the second one is you're making sure almost 100,000 more people get health care and saving taxpayers $2 billion. I think those are both pretty good.
I think they're good ones. I think most people in the state of Wisconsin would agree that they're good ones.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Dianne. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Let's welcome a great consumer advocate for everyone across the country, Rohit Chopra. Thank you for being here today with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so let's start just so people really understand, what is the CFPB and why is it important to people?
You know, we have so many acronyms in our government. And this acronym, it stands for Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, but it really is about standing up to powerful players on Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and more to make sure that finance and business is part of the American dream, not a way to exploit people.
Yeah. And you were there when it started. Can you just talk a little bit about that creation? I just briefly mentioned out of the financial crisis that we had, but can you talk about why we did this agency?
Well, you know, it's such a contrast to this so-called Department of Government Efficiency. But actually, in 2010, Congress actually took a hard look at all these agencies and found all sorts of failures and abuse. During the 2000s, George W. Bush's administration was constantly so-called cutting regulations. But those regulation cutting turned into a gigantic financial crisis that destroyed trillions of dollars in Wisconsin and across the country. People lost their homes, people had more debt, and really the whole global economy collapsed. So what Congress did was said, you know what? We have the Federal Reserve, we have these other agencies. They're working on other things, but they are not actually prosecuting the biggest financial institutions when it comes to cheating consumers. So what a professor, a law professor, came up with an idea for a new agency that would eliminate other functions of other agencies and make one accountable bureau to prosecute these large financial institutions. Now, that professor was Elizabeth Warren, and she was part of setting it up. And in those early days when we set it up, a key design feature was, how do we make sure this place doesn't get captured by regulated companies? And also, how do we use digital technology to allow consumers to vindicate their rights and get refunds? And that's exactly what would happen during my tenure. Thousands of people, we would get hundreds of thousands of people coming to the CFPB every month with what their issue was. And it wasn't just in some black hole suggestion box. We told the companies to respond. That means with almost no staff, every single day, people were getting fees refunded, their credit report fixed, and so much more. And in many ways, it was government efficiency at its finest, and really a bulwark against abuse by the financial sector.
And was it the time period when it happened? I think we were going through, and again, you're the expert on this, so I'm going to paraphrase it in lay terms maybe, but we were going through the derivatives problem, right? Isn't that one of the build-ups to what happened to this agency?
Yeah, what was happening was that financial companies, lenders were peddling mortgages that they knew in many cases people could not afford. But here's what they would do. They might take those loans and they would sell it to Wall Street. Wall Street would convert it into securities to trade. And those derivatives, a fancy word, to basically say they were gambling and speculating on them. Yeah. And the result was that the biggest banks almost on the planet faced doom for themselves. And you know what bothers a lot of us is that those financial institutions, they got bailed out, but many of the homeowners and consumers lost everything.
Yeah. And thankfully then this agency was put together and you were around at that time, which has got to be kind of pleasing to then be the director of something. You were there during its formation in those important initial days. What are some of the things that you think that the public should know about that were some of the most important things that have come out of having the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau?
You know what's so good? During COVID, there was a lot of worries that the mortgage market or the banks would collapse. A lot of the work by the CFPB has prevented so much systemic harm. But I'm also really proud of what this law enforcement has done to recover money for people. During my time there, we recovered about $10 billion in profit in penalties and redress for millions of people across the country. We banned companies like Navient, formerly known as Sallie Mae, from further abusing student loan borrowers. This is the agency that uncovered the Wells Fargo fake account scandal that led to the identity theft of so many people. We also went after the big guys like Apple and Goldman Sachs for violating the law, as well as even auto companies. Many automakers have lenders, and we found that some of them were polluting people's credit reports with wrong information that destroyed their credit score. So we were almost every day landing more and more help for consumers. I think we averaged about $5 million a day.
Nice.
And right now, since I was fired, the CFPB has brought in not a single penny for people who have been scammed and ripped off.
I want to talk about that in just a little bit because we had Russ Vogt who's now the acting director, while he's the director of the Office of Management and Budget, in our subcommittee this week. And the devastation I think he's doing to the agency is honest. It was, we know, very severe. But, talk about some of the things that people, because sometimes people don't relate directly to federal government, right? Like, what is federal government doing for me? Well, they know Medicare and they know Social Security. And I think most people know Medicaid because so many people benefit from that as well. But when you start to get to some of the agencies like yours, it's doing so much for them and they don't even sometimes know it because it's in behind the scenes, but sometimes it's very much in front of the scenes, like overdraft fees at banks. I know so many people who pay these overdraft fees. Just talk about that, for example. Tell us about what was happening and what you guys did to help protect the
Yeah. Well, we really helped conquer some of the worst problems when it comes to abuses and overdraft fees. And if it's okay, I'll just explain a little bit the history.
Mhm.
So we have a law on the books from 1968 called the Truth in Lending Act. And it basically says that if you're giving someone a loan, you got to be upfront with the interest rate and how it's going to be computed every whatever day, month, year. But in those days, there wasn't debit cards, there wasn't auto bill pay. Most payments were made in cash and in checks, often sent through the mail. So, over 50 years ago, sometimes there was a mismatch between when your check landed in the mail or when you received your paycheck. So they created a little carve out 50 years ago that said, you know what, if you're just charging a very, very modest fee to deal with a mismatch between what your account balance is and when your check got cashed, we'll let it go through. And the regulator said, don't worry about doing all those loan disclosures. It's just a little convenience charge. But over time, as people start using debit cards, some of the biggest banks really figured something out. They could order our payments in ways that would trigger more and more fees. So we have situations now where someone is charging $3-4 on their debit card and getting hit with a $35 fee.
Yeah.
So all we wanted was to bring some common sense to this market. And we said the following: if you're going to charge overdraft fees, you either need to come clean about the interest rate you're charging, or you really need to have a very modest fee. So we did the math and found that a modest fee that could cover their costs was about $8.
Okay.
And that would be saving people across the country so much money and restore some fairness. We have since seen so many banks, even though those rules are being overturned by Congress, they're keeping those fees low, and some of them are charging $0 now. I think it has made a big difference, and especially for people who are starting out in life.
Yeah.
So many people as college students or as, just trying to get by earlier in their career, they make mistakes, but those mistakes shouldn't send them on a treadmill of debt that they can never recover from.
No, when you talked about like the real interest rate, I think right away of the payday loan industry, which since my time in the state legislature and here in Congress, by far one of the most predatory, I think, that's out there. Were there any actions that you did around payday loans or that you wish we could do around payday loans? Because I really think that they really take advantage of the least fortunate the most.
Well, this is the core issue, which is for thousands of years, lenders would only give you a loan if they knew you could pay it back.
Yeah.
But we have business models, just like those subprime mortgages I shared with you earlier, that make money even when the borrower crashes and burns.
Mm-hmm.
They make money by getting people to flip loans over and over, or they jam in lots of fees. So we did a lot to go after loans that were setting people up to fail. We brought actions not just against certain types of payday lending, but new types of predatory loans, including ones that are peddled door to door when you are financing a solar panel on your roof, or when your employer is in cahoots to make your paycheck go earlier in exchange for a high fee or a high rate loan. So we really looked at this holistically because I didn't want to just look backward, but also to stop the abuses that were coming on the horizon, especially in the digital world.
Yeah. Now, in one of the issues right now, because we've had a couple senators, actually Senator Warren's office and Senator Merkley came and spoke with the Progressive Caucus this week, and they got talking a little bit about some of the bills that are going through the Senate right now. But something I think for many people, things like stable coins and cryptocurrency and all this is still somewhat, of a confusing idea. What is this? And then when you see Donald Trump puts out a crypto coin and it's considered a collectible and not a currency, and people are invited to dinners. Can you talk, just as an expert of protecting consumers broadly, can you give us a very simple 101 of things like cryptocurrency, stablecoin, and other related types of items, and what people should be looking for to make sure that no one is going to get ripped off along the way?
Yeah, I think sometimes people should really be skeptical of anything that promises to solve problems that they can't really clearly understand. Here's an example when it comes to things like a stable coin is just a branding term,
Okay.
but it really is just another privatized currency.
Mm-hmm.
So what it is it is somebody who says, you give me your real cash, you transfer it from your bank to me, and I'm going to give you my digital dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, that works great when it's coming through a bank or a credit union, because we know that depositors always get their money back. It
Right.
has deposit insurance. When a bank or credit union runs into issues, they can borrow from the Federal Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to just make sure that if people are getting something that is supposed to be money, it better come with the stability that it will always be there, that they have the consumer protections when their funds are subject to a fraud, error, or a hack,
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that they are not being surveilled 24/7 on every payment they make. Mark Zuckerberg came up with an idea for a stable coin or digital currency about 5-6 years ago.
I remember
And that was part of their plan, to be able to watch all of our payments and how we spend, to match it up with our web browsing history, our social map, even information captured on wearable devices. And I really worry about this because that is leading to a world of no more price tags, of personalized prices that charge you more based on who you are or what they know is going on in your mind.
Yeah.
If they know that you need to get to that funeral or job interview, is that going to push up the price of the airline ticket? If they know that you're dealing with cancer, is that going to make them push up the price on certain types of insurance? So I think we got to make sure that when we are dealing with money, it is stable,
Mm-hmm.
that people are protected, and that at the end of the day, it is not a creepy way to spy on people. We've seen Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, others. I think they're really jealous of what they see in China, where big tech companies really control the flow of payments and are able to catalog what everybody is purchasing, where they're doing it, and how they can use and monetize that data.
That's really scary, right? If that would happen here, where the price you pay can be manipulated like that, that it's not just a price available for everyone, but you can be charged different things. If someone was looking at, because I do hear more people say they're like intrigued, they hear about cryptocurrency, so they're thinking about investing. If they were to do that, and maybe you shouldn't even use the word investing, they're thinking about purchasing, I think is the proper word. What should people be thinking about or asking to make sure that they're protected if they're looking at doing this?
That's a big question. And I think right now, we have seen some real blowups and explosions. Some people might remember Sam Bankman-Fried,
Yes.
major crypto player that essentially was running a house of cards. So, Congressman, I'm not really sure I have a good answer on how people should be thinking about investments, other than it's important to be skeptical, it's important to do your homework, but it's also important to remember that some of the best investors are ones who buy and hold boring stuff forever.
Yeah.
And some of the best investors are ones who periodically buy the diverse market index and just sit on it. And I think sometimes that means they'll be paying a lot less fees and will have more stability. But it's a tough question, and I think we need to do more to make sure that these meme coins and scams are not used to make so many people lose a lot of money.
And I appreciate that. And the fact that there's not the same regulation at this point, right? Just alone should be a concern for folks. One of my hearings that came up, and it was an interesting conversation about, when Donald Trump started a meme coin and people invested in it. And he recently had a dinner for some of the folks that invested in it. But the fact that that's not regulated like a currency or a financial instrument, but as a collectible. And I think it was Maureen Glusenkamp Perez who said, so it's like a Beanie Baby? And it is, right? That's the problem right now. That's the level of regulation or oversight.
Yeah, we need to make sure we get a hold of it. And a few days ago, I wrote an article in Foreign Policy magazine about how we need to make sure that these stable coins, and I really think new payment technologies can be awesome. It can lower costs and fees for small businesses, for retailers. It can really help people get paid. I'd love a world where people could get paid every day after their days of work. But I also don't want it to undermine our dollar. And I have some worries about how it could affect our status as a safe and stable and widely accepted dollar. But we got to make sure we're also guarding against invasive data collection on how we use our money. And I think that's really an important part of the discussion.
With all your expertise, what are some of the other areas you're concerned about that we may not be watching as closely as we should? And again, towards the end, I want to talk about right now what Donald Trump's doing to the agency, but just in general, what are some of the areas that you really think we need to, as policymakers and as consumers, make sure we're paying attention to, because you see potential for fraud or failure?
Yeah, well, I really think it's super important to make sure that we're looking hard about how these tariffs ripple through the economy. And I'm going to be honest with you, I really think there's a role for tariffs to make sure that our workers and our businesses are able to compete fairly. And I see so many unfair practices by other countries, and we should really address that. But what's happening right now is chaos and confusion in order to generate attention. And so the result is we have small businesses all over who don't have the ability to accumulate lots of inventory.
Right.
They are way down on the list compared to the big guys. And I don't want to see them wiped out because of this. And we saw how many of them did get wiped out during the pandemic. So making sure that this chaos does not lead to more monopolization, more power for the biggest banks and biggest companies, that to me is what the stakes are. I know tariffs can sound really technical, but we got to make sure that local businesses and startups who may one day become big businesses are actually able to survive this.
Yeah, we're hearing this like crazy. I agree. Targeted tariffs can be used very wisely and strategically when another country, China dumping cheap steel can affect our steel industry, the workers. You should have targeted tariffs. You should reply with that. But the broad use that we're seeing without really a formula of usage used, as you said, to get attention, right? He's trying to make them really have new trade deals in some ways. But even that, I think, is giving it more strategy than maybe is behind some of the tariffs that we've seen proposed. And the small businesses in our area, I mean, they can't compete when they're trying to buy now for holiday goods for November and December. And yet, you don't know week to week what that tariff will be with any given country.
Yeah, and here's the other thing is that factories just don't grow out of the ground.
Right.
We want to create a situation where there's actual investments in creating capacity here in America to make sure that we have generic drugs, to make sure that we have key materials, to make sure that we can actually arm ourselves if there is a major conflict. So we're going to have to work with our allies to do this. And when I see picking fights over tariffs on penguins or with Canada, it just seems like it's missing the whole point, and that there is a lot to do to make sure our workers can compete. But I don't want this to just end up being some giveaway to Wall Street and the biggest companies.
And so let's take the Trump presidency and what they're doing to this agency. I think he's never liked this agency, right? I think that's we saw it in the first Trump administration. We're really seeing it right now. I mean, he's rolled back protections on things like predatory payday loans, arbitration clauses. He's loosened the enforcement on these entities that have ripped off consumers. And now it's back, I think, like I said, even stronger. Russ Vought, who's the architect of Project 2025, has been very clear what he thinks about the agency. And I think he's trying to roll back something like 85-90% of the staff in the agency. Tell us a little more about what's happening right now and why we should be concerned.
Well, I think actually the story is a little bit different than what we're seeing at other agencies. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump actually came out in favor of capping credit card interest rates. That's something I support too.
Yeah.
We also, in his first speech as president, he spoke at the, that billionaire convention, Davos. He focused and called out some of these big banks for not treating people well. But then something happened. We know that Elon Musk in particular wanted to, quote, delete the CFPB because some of these big tech players really saw the CFPB as a hurdle in their ability to create new currencies and harvest information about us. We know that part of the reason that they want to destroy the CFPB is because the agency's work is extremely popular across party lines.
Right.
The only place it is controversial is with lobbyists in Washington. And the reality is when you look at what has been accomplished, reforms on junk fees, addressing challenges people face with medical bills, getting their credit reports fixed, making sure that credit cards are accurately billing people, these aren't really things that are particularly controversial in any red or blue state. So we sometimes got to look and find out who is actually calling the shots to shut down this agency. We've seen some clues. We see that the biggest banks, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, they were able to secure functionally a corporate pardon
Right.
for their role in allowing fraud to fester on the payment app Zelle, which is used by so many people. We saw how mortgage lenders caught discriminating are now being pardoned. So we're not exactly sure, but it's clear many companies are now wondering what the hell is going on over there. And even the financial firms, especially the honest ones, are growing real worried that they're going to have to compete with scam artists and fraudsters.
What are you afraid that they're looking at doing or they may do?
I think they might undo very critical protections on what we call mortgage servicing.
Okay.
Mortgage servicers are the companies that help to make sure your account is in order, and they're very much part of the foreclosure process. We saw there was a massive meltdown with the mortgage servicers after the financial crisis, and there was systemic fraud and illegal foreclosures. You know, there's so many problems that could occur, but when there is messes in the mortgage market, it can destroy an individual family's life, but it can also lead to big problems for our global economy, as we saw. So if they want to mess around with mortgages, there could be big, big trouble for all of us.
Oh, no, good flag to be watching. Obviously, the biggest investment for most people is their home. And, we need to watch that. If
I could, we also want to make sure that with the cost of housing so high all across the country, that we're not doing things to make it even worse and squeeze people even further. And I just think that that's so critical. Look, many people probably haven't even heard of the CFPB, but because of that agency, those mortgage companies are servicing their accounts better. They're not throwing people into foreclosure illegally. And I like to think of it when I walk on a plane, I expect that I don't have to do a lot of research about the aircraft's history, that it will take off and land safely. That's because it's inspected. And that's exactly what the CFPB does, to inspect those companies to make sure it is all working. And my understanding is all of those inspections have been called off since I was fired on February 1st.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Now, this is, when watching Russ Vogt come to the committee and present, it's clear this is a guy who is an ideologue of a very extreme nature, who's got a very specific viewpoint that has very little regulation, and very little regulation generally helps those who already have power or money, but certainly not the average person. And that is a real fear. And it came out very strongly this week.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to, though, see how it plays out. Because if this is their defund the police over Wall Street approach.
Yeah.
But, if there is an epidemic of crime, there's going to need to be a concerted effort by our state AGs and future federal law enforcement to aggressively prosecute what is going on right now. So I would just hope that the easiest answer isn't to have a lot of crime against consumers, but for there to be those inspections and that oversight to keep the game honest.
If we had a different administration, let's say President Warren, we'll use her as an example, because since her name was raised during this podcast, what would you like to see a reinvigorated agency able to do in a different administration.
Well, it's more than just one agency. The CFPB is so key, but there's also so much other work across these agencies we have to do to really unrig the system.
Yeah.
I really think that people, and I feel this way too, that the government just over and over again surrenders to the powerful companies
Mm-hmm.
that seem to now write all the rules and the laws in our society. I've really focused my career these past several years on zeroing in on a real big issue for me, which is corporate repeat offenders.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when an individual gets caught multiple times violating the law, you know, sometimes they go to jail for life.
Yeah.
But it feels like the biggest companies, when they violate the law, they pay a fine and then nothing happens. It just keeps going in a rinse repeat cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, small businesses, if they violate the law, they really get the hammer thrown at them. But there's something that has allowed the biggest players to get off the hook and sometimes to even get bailed out in the process.
Wow.
Just this week, we saw Wells Fargo has essentially been immunized now by the Federal Reserve, and their sanctions have been lifted despite repeated violations even after the fake account scandal. I really think this is wrong and needs an all of government approach to fix it.
Yeah. What are some of the other agencies? Because you rightfully have said, you know, there's other agencies also that are doing this work. Name some of the other agencies so people kind of can know where the federal government is protecting them.
Yeah, I actually want to share some things that maybe people have never really heard about and I barely knew about.
Please.
One is the Surface Transportation Board. It's a teeny tiny agency that makes sure freight rail is working,
Mhm.
that it is not engaged in any shenanigans to rip people off, and to make sure the flow of goods is happening. We saw in COVID, and frankly, we're going to see more and more changes in our supply chain. We need little agencies like that working.
Mhm.
We need the Consumer Product Safety Commission, another little agency that makes sure that toys are not poisonous or that hand tools you put in your garage won't kill you.
Mhm.
I think that there's little things that we forget and that go a long way. You know, the US actually has had an edge because we put into place some guardrails in our securities markets, our banks, and others. There's a lot of other countries out there that have no regulation and they're not doing so good. We know that to make business thrive, there needs to be clear rules and tough enforcement against those who violate it. But of course, there's more too. You mentioned the Federal Trade Commission. They're stopping big mergers. The list goes on and on. But I want people to know that we have to hold government accountable to just make sure things are working. And dismantling agencies, it's just not going to do it. It's just going to be a big giveaway to those who already have power.
And coming from a guy who has an exclusive club like Mar-a-Lago, why would you expect anything different, right? This is someone who has made his life around this. Anything else you want to share about consumer protection that you think is important for people, especially in this moment with this federal government?
Well, I want to make sure that everyone understands that the more and more that artificial intelligence and algorithms are governing our life, it is very important that we kick the tires on these technologies so that it doesn't make a small club of tech companies have more and more power in our society. I mentioned earlier the issue of payments and privacy. I think people listening, go look up a product online using your phone versus someone else's phone. Call a ride share and take a look if you're seeing different prices that are targeted at you. I know that many of us don't want to use an iPhone because there's evidence to suggest that iPhone users get higher prices. We got to look at all of these pricing tricks and really work at the state level and federal level to protect consumers against that. I don't think consumers ever expect that their web browsing history or personal information is being weaponized against them to rip them off.
Yeah. Thank you, Rohit. This is very helpful. And, thank you for all the service you've done over a number of years and a number of jobs you've done. You've been there constantly fighting on behalf of consumers. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you're going to do next in this area to keep, because I'm sure the work is not done for you. How can people follow you in your work? What's the best way social media wise to do that?
Yeah, I'm at Chopra USA. And I think the most important thing is now is not the time to surrender. Now is the time to team up, organize, and really advocate. I really saw how you and some of your colleagues, even when times were tough, you were organizing all of us so that we could accomplish some real, tangible things. And I think we got to keep doing that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's the one thing out of all of the bad that we're seeing, proposed with this big ugly bill and everything else that's out there, and people are concerned. It's bringing people to be more active than ever. My biggest town halls I've ever had in 12 and a half years have happened in the last few months. Our election in Wisconsin for a nonpartisan Supreme Court race, we had midterm congressional level turnout because people want to be heard. People are being active. Politics is not a spectator sport. So fighting on behalf of their rights as consumers, fighting on their rights when it comes to what the federal government's funding with their tax dollars. I mean, people are active. It's been really good. So
it is. And I think, though, sometimes still people need to know that it's not just about tuning in and watching, but also really using their voice. You mentioned things going on at the state level. It's important to be pushing your state attorneys general, your state legislators for more to do to protect consumers. That big, beautiful nonsense bill you talked about, they're looking to mostly defund the CFPB. So every little piece is important, and we are going to have to make sure we do everything we can to advance a country and an economy that really does work for people and not just a handful of those at the top.
Well, thank you for all the work you've done, and thank you for being with us today on the podcast.
Thanks so much.